The Kremlin has wasted no time finding something to complain about with Britain's new Prime Minister. Dmitry Peskov appears particularly offended that one of Andy Burnham's first messages after taking office was a promise of unconditional support for Ukraine. In Moscow's familiar version of reality, helping a country defend itself against a Russian invasion is apparently what keeps the war going. The complaint came as Peskov was explaining why a Russian warship had been carrying out live-fire artillery drills near the British coast.
All exercises and actions of our warships are carried out in strict accordance with international maritime law. Therefore, there is no need to see any hints here. But in turn, of course, the arrival of the new UK Prime Minister, probably one of his first actions was the remark of unconditional support for Ukraine. Therefore, about Britain's intention to keep doing everything for the war to continue. This is a fact, which we, of course, are noting.
Ukraine has a new commander-in-chief. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has dismissed General Alexander Syrsky and appointed Mykhailo Drapatyi to replace him, following several days of a mass protest in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. The demonstrations initially began after the dismissal of Defense Minister Mykhailo Fedorov, but protesters also demanded the removal of Syrsky, whom they associated with an outdated Soviet-style command culture. This is now the second major decision Zelenskyy has reversed or changed under public pressure.
Dear Mr. President, I am grateful for the trust to lead the largest and most powerful branch of the Ukrainian military. For my part, I will do my best to ensure that it develops, acquires new capabilities, and is ready for the challenges that await us in the future. People, technology, and management processes.
Drapatyi previously served as a commander of Ukraine's ground forces and is widely associated with the calls for faster military reform and a more modern approach to command. Zelenskyy said that new commander and the military leadership must now present an updated defense strategy. It is expected to include further reform of the corps systems, faster delivery of weapons and drones, stronger air defense, and a clear mobilization plan. Russian dictator Putin will lead the Russian delegation at the APEC summit in China. The meeting will take place in Shenzhen on November 18 and 19. Russia's foreign ministry says Putin's participation shows how important economic ties with the Asia-Pacific region, especially China, are for Moscow.
The summit is scheduled for November 18th and 19th in Shenzhen. The Russian delegation will be headed by President Vladimir Putin. This shows the importance we attach to economic relations with our partners in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly with China, as well as our high assessment of China's approach to strengthening APEC's potential to promote progress and prosperity.
China has made openness, innovation, and cooperation the main themes of its APEC presidency. Moscow also says it wants the forum to help counter sanctions and protectionism and promote closer regional economic integration.
One of APEC's main roles is to serve as a factory of ideas and put forward practical proposals. Today, they are needed more than ever to reverse the wave of protectionism and sanctions and put the regional economy on a path toward integration. China has already proposed major initiatives aimed at strengthening connectivity, technological modernization, and creating a free trade area in the Asia-Pacific region.
Russia is once again putting its strategic bombers on display over Europe. The Russian Defense Ministry has released footage of two 22 M3 long-range bombers flying over the Baltic Sea. The aircraft were escorted by Su-35S fighter jets, and the mission lasted more than 4 hours. Moscow calls it a scheduled flight over the neutral waters and insists everything was carried out under international rules. But the message is difficult to miss. Russia is once again using nuclear-capable bombers to remind NATO countries that it can bring military pressure closer to their borders without technically crossing them. A secret meeting between former senior German officials and figures close to Putin took place in Baku earlier this month. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he knew nothing about it. But the Azerbaijani president Ilham Aliyev confirmed that the participants were in Baku at the same time and said Azerbaijan's territory had been used without its knowledge.
I can give you a very simple answer. I was not aware of such a meeting. For months, we have been trying to persuade President Putin to enter talks. Together with Ukraine, we have repeatedly made proposals for negotiations at the European level. President Putin continues to refuse. It is entirely up to the Russian government and the Russian president to end this war and enter negotiations. As long as he refuses, we have no alternative but to continue supporting Ukraine in its fight for survival against Russian aggression. We first learned about this meeting from media reports. Neither Russia nor Germany informed us. In other words, Azerbaijan's territory was used without our knowledge. Our investigation confirmed that former senior German officials Ronald Pofalla and Matthias Platzek arrived in Baku from Berlin on July 12th and returned on July 14th. At the same time, former Russian Prime Minister Viktor Zubkov and Valery Fadeyev arrived from Moscow. These travel records give us grounds to say that a secret meeting did take place in Baku. We do not know what was discussed because we were not involved. But should this meeting contribute to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, we could only welcome that.
During a Senate hearing, Republican Senator John Kennedy put two blunt questions to America's top military officer, General Dan Kane. Who should win the war in Ukraine and whether Russia is America's friend?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. General, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, who do we want to win?
Sir, I want Ukraine to win.
Is Russia America's friend?
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't quite hear your question.
Is Russia America's friend?
I think that depends on your definition of friend. I think it's a complicated relationship. But no, I don't think there are friends.
Thank you.
Russia says it wants closer cooperation with the Southeast Asian countries as Moscow continues looking for partners beyond the West. Speaking at a regional meeting in Manila, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov praised the prospects of a wider political, economic, and humanitarian ties.
The leaders of our countries reached an important agreement in the sphere of politics and security, the fight against new threats and challenges, the development of trade, economic, investment, cultural, educational, and humanitarian ties. We see very good prospects in the field of ensuring food and energy security, digital transformation, and the platform economy.
Lavrov also spoke about international law, openness and equality, principles that Russia regularly invokes abroad while violating them in Ukraine.
For our part, we consistently support the central role of ASEAN in all regional affairs. We make a strong contribution to strengthening the system of interstate relations built around the association, which is based on the principles of international law, openness, equality, and, I would like to emphasize, consideration of the interests of all participants.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Russia's war against Ukraine remains the biggest obstacle to broader cooperation between Washington and Moscow. At the same time, he stressed that the United States is ready to help bring the war to an end if an opportunity arises.
Obviously, the war in Ukraine, I think, has in many ways impeded the ability of Russia and the United States to find areas of agreement on other topics. That doesn't mean we won't seek to find other areas of potential cooperation. But by the same token, we'd like to see that war come to an end. We think it would be good for Russia if that war came to an end. So we'll raise it. And as I said, the U.S. remains open and willing to play a constructive role in bringing that war to an end if that opportunity presents itself.
Rubio also defended maintaining dialogue with Moscow, arguing that communication between the world's two largest nuclear powers is a matter of responsibility, despite deep disagreements.
This is very simple. Russia possesses we are the two largest nuclear armed countries on the planet. For us not to talk would be reckless and irresponsible. We have to have a relationship with the Russian government, even though we have areas of disagreement.
The United Nations says the war is having an increasingly devastating impact on civilians in Ukraine, as the long-range attacks continue to hit residential areas and critical infrastructure.
The war in Ukraine is having a deepening impact on civilians by the day. The scale and intensity of long-range attacks impacting residential buildings and critical civilian infrastructure are shocking. These attacks must stop.
UN monitors also warn that FPV drones are transforming everyday life near the front line, forcing civilians to calculate whether it is safe to leave their homes at all.
I have seen the impact of FPV drones firsthand. During my recent visits to Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Kharkiv, and Dnipro, I saw how these drones are transforming civilian life. People told us that they no longer decide whether they want to go to the market, visit friends, go outside, work in their fields. They must first decide whether or not it's safe enough to leave their homes. People described measures to me that they've been taking to protect themselves while walking outside, like darting between buildings, leaving their homes at different times of the day. Across these visits, civilians consistently described feeling tracked by FPV drones while carrying out ordinary daily activities, gardening, walking their dogs, feeding their animals outside, going to the store, driving, or simply walking or cycling outdoors.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching.